I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins from Your Black World, and a lot of you saw the case of Renisha McBride, who was a 19-year-old young lady who was shot by Mr. Theodore Wafer. And on the night in question, a lot of things happened that led to Mr. Wafer shooting Renisha on her front porch. We'll go into that in more detail, but before we get into that, I want to talk about who I have on the line. I have a distinguished attorney, DeMario Solomon-Simmons. He's a respected lawyer out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And first, I want to ask Mr. Solomon-Simmons, how you doing today, brother?
Hey, Dr. Watkins, how you doing today? Good to see you, and thanks for having me on today.
Oh, I'm glad to see you too. And so, with the case of Renisha McBride, it's an interesting case because it's not just it doesn't have just serious legal implications. It's also been somewhat politicized.
Yes,
There are people that have compared it to Trayvon Martin. There are people who have talked about the lives of young black women being worth less than the lives of young black men. And we can get to all that in a second. But before we get to all that, I want to kind of start with the facts. And I'll lay out a couple of the facts with you. And I'd like to get your legal interpretation in terms of what you see on this case as the legal expert that you are. On the night in question, and I talked about this on CNN the other day, it looked like Renisha was under the influence. She'd smoked, her friend said that she smoked 3 blunts that day, and then also she drank half a bottle of vodka. And then she, for whatever reason, decided to drive, which probably wasn't the best idea because she crashed
right,
into a parked car.
right,
A witness says that she came out to try to help Renisha, but instead of staying, which you're supposed to do after an accident, you're supposed
right,
to wait for the police, wait for the paramedics. Renisha left and went about half a mile away and knocked on Mr. Wafer's door.
right.
And so, and it's interesting because the interpretation that she was knocking on the door to get help, it's a little bit questionable if you knew that she was going to get help at the scene of the accident. If the police and the paramedics were on their way, why not wait there? But anyway, at this point is where it's still a little bit fuzzy. It's all being worked out in court. But when Renisha knocked on Mr. Wafer's door at about 4:21 in the morning, Mr. Wafer had a gun, and Renisha ended up being shot. So,
Yes.
laying out those basic facts from what we know in the case, what goes through your mind as a legal expert when you hear all of this?
So first of all, obviously, it's a tragedy that this young woman, 19-year-old woman, has lost her life in this terrible scenario. And like you said, she probably should not have been driving after consuming alcohol and drugs. The third thing I think about, I don't think this is the same as the Trayvon Martin scenario that happened last year or 2 years ago. We know in that case, a young man was stalked and accosted by George Zimmerman and eventually shot. In this case, we know that George Zimmerman from the very beginning put race of Trayvon being an African American male into play. We know that by the 911 calls. We have no indication here, as far as I've seen so far, that Mr. Wafer knew that Ms. McBride was an African American female. That's number one. And number two, obviously, he did not track her down because she came to his household. So I think from a legal or from a political standpoint, I would say I don't personally think it's the same based on the facts that I've seen and know so far that this is a Trayvon Martin scenario.
Hmm. Well, as of right now, Mr. Wafer is saying that he did not know that the gun was loaded when he pulled it out. I'm definitely curious. I think that people make a very legitimate point when they say, why did you have to shoot her? You didn't have to shoot her, right?
Right,
You could have called 911. He said he couldn't find his phone. He could have stayed inside the house, kept the door locked. But instead, he did come outside and he did end up shooting her, which doesn't have to occur. But then, there is that other side that says this man wasn't looking for trouble, right?
right,
It's 4:21 in the morning. You're not out
right,
looking to kill a black person at 4:21 in
right,
the morning.
right,
And there is also the idea that it could be startling to have somebody banging on your door at 4 o'clock in the morning. And again, maybe she was just politely tapping, but he says that it was loud and it startled him, and I can understand that a little bit. I remember I had a neighbor who was I didn't even know this woman. I'm not kidding when I say this. I had never met this woman in my life, and she was drunk. And she came to my door, and she didn't just ring the doorbell once. She rang it over and over and over and over and over again. It was like midnight, so I'm thinking it's an emergency. So I ran downstairs to answer the door, wondering, what's going on? Is there a fire? What? And this lady that I didn't even know She doesn't even say hello. She's trying to come into my house. And I'm like, what are you doing? I don't
Right,
even know. And I'm
right,
and I literally had to grab her and push this lady. I don't believe in violence against women, but
right,
I had to push this lady off my porch. I'm like, lady, what? You
right,
need to get the hell up out of here.
right,
And so I remember, even though I was bigger than her, and it wasn't like she was a threat to me. I remember being startled. And then I remember actually having to get out of character to kind of deal with this. And here's the other funny part. Later on, when she wasn't drunk anymore, she didn't even remember what happened. She didn't even know what she had done. So I thought about that when I thought about how this guy must have reacted.
right.
What did you think in terms of the legal implications? I mean, what how do you process? I mean, how do you look at sort of the differential between a George Zimmerman who stalks out and hunts down somebody and kills them versus a man who's awakened out of his sleep who ends up killing somebody? Are those crimes similar enough that the sentences should be the same?
Again, I don't think this is a George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin type scenario. Again, like you said, he was in his own home. It was 4:55 in the morning. I think any of us, if we're honest, if someone comes knocking on your door, even if they're knocking, let's give an assumption that Miss McBride was knocking politely. That still would be startling. That still would be something that's disconcerting because we don't expect people to come to our house at 4:55 in the morning. So that's number one. But number two, you have to look at the fact that in Michigan, you had the same type of stand your ground law, which allowed Mr. McShay, I believe I'm saying his name correct, Mr. Wafer, I'm sorry, to have the opportunity to defend himself if he felt like he was under attack. I think the thing that's interesting here is number one, there's been kind of a change in his story. First, he said that he thought his gun was unloaded and he didn't know it would go off. But yesterday or 2 days ago in court, they stated that it was self-defense because he was scared. So I think that number one is a discrepancy that the defense is going to have a challenge maybe to overcome. And then secondly, I think the issue of stand your ground allows you not to retreat if you feel as if you have been threatened. But in this case, Mr. Wafer, he actually unlocked the door and opened the door and picked the gun out and then shot Miss McBride. So the question has to be, was it reasonable for him not to he didn't retreat. He actually went forward. He actually became the aggressor in that situation. I think can be argued by the state or the prosecution. And I think that's a question that's going to be very difficult for the defense, or the defense needs to answer that.
Hmm. Interesting. Well, to kind of give some more nuance to this, I'm sitting reading, and it says that that she appeared on his door 3 hours uh, after the accident, which so you wonder what was going on then.
Right,
Her blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal limit, and he was saying that it was a consistent knocking on the door. He says there was a consistent knocking on the door, and I'm trying to look through the windows and the door. He said it's banging somewhere else, so I opened the door, kind of like, who is this? And the gun discharged. And I agree, it certainly would be a problem if his story is changing. Now, let me ask you this: so, if you're judge and jury on something like this, and somebody recommended a way to deal with this fairly, based on the facts that you've seen, is there any assessment you can make on that, or is that too hard to even say?
well, I think right now, from what we know, obviously we know from a public standpoint, but when you get into the legal proceedings and you have that jury there, that jury of 12, or that's going to be hearing this case, they don't hear a lot. Maybe they don't hear everything that we hear. And once, as we saw in the Trayvon Martin case, some things come into evidence that we don't know about, and some things are left out of evidence that we know about as the public. I think it's going to be a difficult case. Again, do I believe that racism is involved? It's hard to say, but I haven't seen anything that states that Mr. Wafer knew that Ms. McBride was an African American female, African American. I mean, he did say he looked out and he saw a shadowy figure, but hey, it's 4:55 in the morning, so I'm sure it was still dark. So I think it's going to be a difficult case. Again, I don't know if this case should be politicized the way it is. That's not my call. But from a legal standpoint, I think the real issue is, did Mr. Wafer, what did he have a reasonable fear for his life that allowed him to have self-defense? And if he did have a fear for his life, why would he open the door and shoot? I mean, that's a question that's going to have to be answered by the jury. If I had to make a prediction, in today's environment, it's going to be difficult. But I think he may be looking at a manslaughter charge, which carries up to 15 years. But if he gets off at the same time he's exonerated, I would not be surprised at that also.
Interesting. Well, it will be interesting to see how it turns out. And it seems that when you talk about the racial dimension of this, as you and I both agreed off camera, that racism's everywhere. We know that
Yes, yes,
sexism is everywhere too,
yes, it
and
is.
I think that the facts should be evaluated as we make sure that this young lady's life is respected for the way it should be respected, and I think at the same time, when you look at any of these cases, you got to look at the facts. Whether you talk
Right.
about Trayvon,
Absolutely.
Renisha, Marissa, any of the cases that people have really been talking about, you got to look at the facts
Absolutely.
and not just the politics of it. So that's what I see. All right, so I'll let you get the last word. Did you have any other thoughts on this?
Again, I think it's a tragedy. At the end of the day, you have a young lady that was 19 years old that's gone. Her family's grieving that, and that's a tragedy. And I hope that if something can come from this, it's a story or understanding that hey, when you mix drugs and alcohol, it usually doesn't turn out well, regardless of what the facts may be it a car accident, be it getting arrested. Anything can happen when you're mixing drugs and alcohol. So I hope that whatever happens, that this is just another reminder for us and for particularly our young people to try to stay away from drugs and alcohol, try to stay away from being at the wrong place at the wrong time. And obviously, this is a tough case for everyone involved, and just wishing for the best for our both families.
Well, I think that's great advice. Yeah, there's not much to say after that. Well, everybody, this is Demario Solomon-Simmons. He is an attorney out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. If you want to follow up with Demario, you can go to his website at Solomon-Simmons.com. That's SOLOMONSIMMONS, Solomon-Simmons.com. And thank you all for checking us out. I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins from Your Black World. Until we meet again, please stay strong, be blessed, and be educated. We are gone. Peace.